And this was interesting. She said, I'm a Christian and a Marxist. And I thought, no.
Well, now I just feel personally called out. You know, as I've been growing this small online community, I actually keep coming across people who say they're Marxist because they are a Christian, or they're anarchist because they're a Christian, they're anarcho-communist because they're a Christian, every type of leftist, every type of anti-capitalist because they are Christian. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you understand the historical Jesus and the historical context in which he arose from. But that's for another video. Because I think a Christian individualist is a way more absurd contradiction. There is nothing individualistic about Christianity. And so in this video, I want to talk about how that concept of individualism that Jordan Peterson talks about, I think it's a little bit confused, and I don't think it means perhaps what he thinks it means. He's not talking about a philosophical individualism like existentialism or a creative individualism. If that was what he was talking about, then I wouldn't be making this video. But he is talking about a particular political and economic individualism. And we know this because he associates it with modern Western values, and he props it up as the antithesis to collectivism, and then rants about postmodern neo-Marxists. There isn't another kind of political and economic individualism associated with modern Western values than the one I'm about to explain. And this is a very particular kind of individualism that arose out of liberalism, posited by people like Hobbes and Kant and Adam Smith. They believed individual liberty could be achieved by just liberating the market. The freer the market, the freer the people, right? If we could just put an unregulated market at the center of society, based on supply and demand and not based on what family you belong to, then that would create space for individuals to liberate themselves through competing in this market. And that sounded great compared to feudalism, where your place in society did depend on what family you belong to. Liberalism was ideologically formulated and established following the French Revolution and the American Revolution in the late 1700s, and the leftists under feudalism wanted to dismantle feudalism and replace it with liberalism through free market capitalism. In the old French court, those who sat on the right side of the king supported the king and the current order, and those who sat on the left side of the court wanted a revolution. So while the liberals were the leftists under feudalism, in our liberal free market capitalist society, the liberals are on the right side in support of capitalism. That's right, conservatives, you're a bunch of filthy liberals too. And now the new leftists under capitalism want to dismantle capitalism and replace it with socialism. This is why liberals aren't leftists. And this is all actually pretty normal for history. As societies evolve, we evolve out of old economic systems and into new ones to fit the current needs of the new humans with our current resources at the time. And during each transition, there's a group of leftists pushing the transition forward, and a small group of people who benefit from the way that the system is, who hold up the transition through putting out propaganda that says everything is fine the way things are, and also stamping out any revolution that arises. People do not open their eyes to the injustices of capitalism because they are manipulated by an ideology of individualism, propagated by the people who want to keep their excessive power in this current system. And this ideology of individualism says every single problem you have is of your own doing, and any sort of success you get is also because of your own doing and your own effort. So therefore, if you ever feel bad about being poor, realize it's your own fault and you're not working hard enough, and those who are succeeding are just working way harder than you. So if you're struggling, it's not because something's wrong with the system, it's because something's wrong with you, and you would be rich too if only you didn't have something wrong with you. So these people who receive this message will also then go to therapy and get the same message, that the source of their depression is within them and they need to change themselves in order to be happy. And with the advent of neoliberalism in the 80s, just months after the election of Ronald Reagan, research into the social and political impact on people's mental illnesses was defunded. And the focus was narrowed to just the effects that the brain has on mental illness. And this narrowing of focus continued even into Obama's administration when he funded the Brain Initiative. And even when the reason for your depression really is just genetics and chemical imbalances, neoliberal individualism makes you feel guilty for feeling depressed and therefore less productive. And negative feelings about our negative feelings makes us even more depressed than we initially were. We've all gone through this, right? The psychotherapist Bruce Rogers Vaughan calls this model of the way we approach depression as something that has its origin inside of you alone and needs to be fixed by you alone. He calls it the disease model. The disease model treats sadness and discontent as something that needs to be treated and gotten rid of, when the reality is usually our sadness and discontent arises as a way of our deepest selves trying to send us a message. And negative feelings need to be listened to in order to find the real source of our problems in life. We need to be able to ask our pain what it's telling us about ourselves and our relationships and the world around us, instead of just exorcising these feelings out of our body through any means necessary so that we can get back to work with no hindrances. Individualism is propaganda by the ruling class to get you to blame yourself for all the world's problems so that you can stay out of their way. This is the type of individualism that Jordan Peterson is referring to by associating it with modern Western values and by propping it up against his strawman caricature of the collectivism of the left. So either Jordan Peterson knows this and he's a bit of a dishonest grifter, or he doesn't realize that he's teetering into this political territory by using the word individualism the way he does and propping it up against collectivism. And what he may be doing through his love of Carl Jung, he may be confusing the concept with the Jungian concept of individuation. Individuation is the most basic, healthy differentiation between ourselves and the world, still a very difficult process, in order to discover the deepest part of ourselves, both wonderful and dark, and develop a healthy sense of self and a basic independence so you can be free to take responsibility and make decisions of your own. It's just a basic part of growing up, a self-development that is supposed to happen when you are young. Think of ancient initiation rites into adulthood. They are intentionally putting the child into the process of individuation, sending them out into the wilderness to find themselves and to return with gifts for the community. Although them returning to the community as an adult is the real gift, because they can now see with much clearer eyes the struggles of the community now that they've gone through their own personal struggle. I feel like I was lucky, or shall I say privileged, enough to have these experiences of individuation and initiation into the world, personal self-development and healthy development of self at a young age. But I also know that it was because I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household with great parents who really cared about me and my own personal growth and development of my independence. And I also grew up in a church community that also really cared about me and were constantly challenging me to take risks and to lead and to discover my full potential. But I know that this is not the norm these days. I got the privilege to experience these healthy stages of self-development while I was young, and so have several other people out there who are quite confused at the Jordan Peterson phenomena. And if that's you, then I think we need to take a step back and acknowledge the privilege that we got to experience these healthy stages of individuation and development at a young age, and acknowledge that several other people out there became adults without those opportunities. People have always wondered, why does it seem like the majority of Jordan Peterson's fan base are a bunch of young white men? Well, it's because young white men in our society today are especially lacking in families and communities that are rooted in a deep tradition to guide them growing up. I mean, everyone raising their kids are just making it up as they go along, but I think white families with no ethnic background are especially making it up as they go along. And with the increasing amount of absent fathers and with the tremendous decline in church attendance among white families, young white men are especially lacking in that communal push to discover their deepest selves through the necessary process of individuation while growing up. And then they find Jordan Peterson.
I don't care what you're going to do, but go out there and make something of yourself for God's sake. Be an honest person and work and get to the top of whatever it is that you want to get to the top of. You know, and stand up for yourself like a respectable human being and be a bit of a light on the world instead of a blight.
And they see and hear him say stuff like this.
So you have to go into the unknown, and that's God's first command. Go into the unknown, because you already know what you know. And that's not enough unless you think you're enough. And if you're not enough and you don't think you're enough, then you have to go where you haven't been. And so that's the first commandment to Abraham. It's like, okay, that's a good one. That makes perfect sense. Go to where you don't know. Yes. And from thy kindred. Well, what does that mean? It means grow up, right? That's what it means. It means get away from your family enough so that you can establish your independence.
And then you see a bunch of these men respond like this. And this. And this.
People were coming up to me and saying, this book saved my life.
He is the ultimate father figure.
I've spent so much time in the dark. It's not easy to find, not so much heroes, but people that can be so helpful.
I mean, I get it. You know, it makes sense. Jordan Peterson is giving these men permission to go on the quest that they were never sent on while they were growing up. The word for quest is also where we get the word question, and perhaps that can tell us a bit of what it's really about. People need to be let loose on a journey of relentless questions. And people look around today at liberal social justice and see nothing but answers and condemnation of questions. That's why it looks like a hindrance to growth and a move backwards. But what can be more of a quest than the questioning of capitalism? We live in a world where people say that capitalism is the final economic system of history and there are no alternatives. So there are hardly any more controversial questions than the questioning of capitalism itself. The alt-right takes advantage of this lack in desire and gives us cheap questions to try to fill up that lack, like, why are there so many Jewish CEOs? Or why are there so many trans people nowadays? And why are there so many pronouns? And why do I have to use them? Or even the most childish questions of, why can't I say the N-word? What happened to free speech? Etc. But those are such softball questions compared to why are we acting like capitalism is the end of history, and why can't we suggest alternatives, and why does the West have a history of stamping out people and countries who try to seek alternatives? The left has consistently made the mistake of thinking that we just need better answers, alternative to the answers of the right. But better answers is just white noise to so many people, no matter how good our answers are. We don't need better answers than the right, we need better questions in order to open up space for people to learn and grow and develop a healthy, holistic sense of self and the world. The intellectual dark web has filled this gap for a lot of people, and that's why a lot of people who have already gone on their personal quests are just very confused by its popularity. And for people who have not gone on their own quests, it's very exciting. So if you've gotten wrapped up in this excitement of people like Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web, you know what? I'm glad you got finally that kick in the ass to start that necessary healthy process of individuation and self-development. But you've got to keep individuating. Individuate out of the propaganda and mind prison of neoliberal individualism so you can really see humanity's full potential. But then keep individuating until you reach completion, and completion doesn't look like individuating until you reach complete isolation. Completion of the journey of individuation is the return back, like the boy who returns back to the community as a man with gifts for the community. Carl Jung even said that the process of individuation leads to more intense and broader collective relationships, and not to isolation. And so often when I hear Jordan Peterson use Carl Jung's ideas of individuation to propagate neoliberal individualism, it so often feels like, man, I don't think Jung really planned for people to take his ideas in that direction. I even have a friend right now who's getting his master's in depth psychology, who also reads a lot of Jung. And also when he tells people that he's studying depth psychology, people say, "Oh, have you heard of Jordan Peterson?" And for a long time, he always said, "No, I have no idea who that is," because we definitely don't talk about him in academia. And eventually he decided to check out some of his videos, and he felt the same way. Like, are we reading the same Carl Jung? Doesn't really feel like it. Continuing the process of individuation, discovering your own personal struggles, leads to you eventually seeing the struggles of everyone else outside of yourself. The boy crosses the threshold, goes through initiation as a way of the tribe saying, "Look, I know that you cannot truly see your role in serving the community until you've gone through your own personal self-discovery. Go on a quest so you can discover your deepest self and your biggest self, so that you can return home and see with clear eyes the needs of the community." Richard Rohr talks about these ancient initiation rites in his book, Adam's Return, the 5 promises of male initiation. And he breaks down the 5 essential truths that the boy is supposed to discover by going on this quest. First of all, life is hard. Second, you are not that important. Third, your life is not about you. Fourth, you are not in control. And fifth, you are going to die. Those are all very essential truths that we are to learn in order to actually mature. And today we have men that are still boys because they haven't had that opportunity to go on that quest. They're stuck and they can't see the struggle of others because they're blinded by their own personal struggle to discover themselves still. Jordan Peterson gives these boys permission to finally go on that quest. But he keeps them there on the quest. And perhaps it's because there are so many people that still need to go on that quest that he only talks about the going on the quest, crossing the first threshold into individuation, that he doesn't talk about the end goal of individuation, crossing the return threshold, the return back with gifts for the community. I think Jordan Peterson is under the impression that what he calls these postmodern, neo-Marxist, collectivist leftists are trying to reverse people's developmental stages from the individuality that we achieved through individuation and subsumed back into the dependence on the caregiver before we learned independence. If he sees it like that, then I totally understand why he's so terrified of it.
A close reading of 20th century history indicates, as nothing else can, the horrors that accompany loss of faith in the idea of the individual. It is only the individual, after all, who suffers. The group does not suffer. Only those who compose it. Thus, the reality of the individual must be regarded as primary. If suffering is to be regarded seriously, without such regard, there can be no motivation to reduce suffering and therefore no respite. Instead, the production of individual suffering can and has and will be again rationalized and justified for its supposed benefits for the future and the group.
But he's wrong. That's not what leftists want. Leftists want a society of adults to have an adult economic system as well. Growth does not end at individuation, and the true purpose of individuation is to know your role in the larger collective. Now that you know yourself and your gifts, you can now fully participate in an interdependent collective of mutual aid. And we do need people to go through individuating journeys of self-discovery in order to become better leftists as well. Because you can't really fully speak to the struggles of people until you've gone through your own personal struggles. These are the kind of so-called leftists that Jordan Peterson has interacted with several times when they've come to protest his talks and stuff. Kids who go to these expensive universities, learn who Marx is, study the stuff for themselves, which they usually have to do on their own because these universities aren't the Marxist training grounds y'all may think they are. And if they were, then these kids wouldn't be screaming at individuals thinking that that's what leads to revolution or that that's anything about what Marx talked about. A lot of these kids are just barely learning this stuff. And then suddenly they go around saying, workers of the world unite, we need to seize the means of production, when they've never even worked a day in their life yet. Therefore, they don't know the depth of the working class struggle yet, and therefore their activism can be incredibly hollow and easily dismantled by people like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson encourages people to cross that first threshold into their journey of individuation on their own hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell called it. And Carl Jung, and therefore Jordan Peterson, also enjoy using Campbell's framing of the hero's journey to illustrate the individuation process. Let's see here. The hero's journey from The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The hero's journey, the monomyth. This is classic. This is how we tell stories. Here it is. Here's the pattern that all the hero myths follow. The mythological hero, setting forth from his common day hut or castle, is lured, carried away, or else voluntarily proceeds to the threshold of adventure. There he encounters a shadow presence that guards the passage. The hero may defeat or conciliate this power and go alive into the kingdom of the dark, brother battle, dragon battle, offering charm, or be slain by the opponent and descend in death, dismemberment, crucifixion. Beyond the threshold, then, the hero journeys through a world of unfamiliar yet strangely intimate forces, some of which severely threaten him, tests, some of which give magical aid, helpers. When he arrives at the nadir of the mythological round, he undergoes a supreme ordeal and gains his reward. The triumph may be represented as the hero's sexual union with the goddess mother of the world, sacred marriage, his recognition by the Father Creator, Father Atonement, his divination, apotheosis, or again, if the powers have remained unfriendly to him, his theft of the boon he came to gain, bride theft, fire theft. Intrinsically it is an expansion of consciousness and therewith of being, illumination, transfiguration, freedom. The final work is that of the return. If the powers have blessed the hero, he now sets forth under their protection, emissary. If not, he flees and is pursued. Transformation flight, obstacle flight. At the return threshold, the transcendental powers must remain behind. The hero re-emerges from the kingdom of dread, return, resurrection. The boon that he brings restores the world, or the elixir. Now, the hero's journey is great, but only because it illustrates important phases of our lives, not the entirety of our lives. Going into the wilderness is not the end of the story, and you can't spend your life in the wilderness. You gotta return home. We develop to realize our place in the larger whole. And neoliberal individualism is what hinders that development. Jordan Peterson seems to think collectivism is hindering that development, as if we're trying to pull people backwards into the dependence on the caregiver before we learned independence. But we just want people to keep developing into a necessary and healthy collectivism. And neoliberal individualism is the real hindrance that stunts growth. By keeping people in the wilderness, discouraged to return home to the collective, convinced that they'd be moving backwards or appear weak. But actual strength is being able to learn these lessons that life is hard, you are not that important, your life is not about you, you are not in control, and you are going to die, and becoming humble enough to return home with gifts for the collective. It doesn't have to be returning literally to the literal place and people you came from. It could be finding a new place and a new people to give gifts to and serve and love and learn how to be an interdependent community as a mature adult. Now, Jordan Peterson actually checked himself into rehab recently. His daughter gave us a video message that told us all about it and talked about how his wife got cancer and it was awful as she was getting better. Going through that process with the family was extremely taxing on everyone. And Jordan Peterson ended up getting some antidepressants from his doctor to help him through this time. And then eventually he ended up becoming very dependent on this medication and he decided to cut him off cold turkey and he suffered severe withdrawal symptoms. And so he checked himself into rehab to try to get better. Now, I think it was completely okay and good that Jordan Peterson got on these antidepressants. And the fact that he slipped up and became dependent and then had bad withdrawal and then checked into rehab, also good, completely fine. He did the right thing, and none of these moments expose any sort of flaw within him. Sure, he's got his flaws, but those are a separate conversation from what happened in this story that can happen to anyone. Also, the day I'm filming this video, his daughter posted another video saying that he got out of rehab, he's all good, he's healthy, he just had a bad allergic reaction. But here's the thing. He is in a tremendously privileged place in life to be able to afford rehab, to afford to spend time in rehab and not work, and to be able to return from rehab and not be buried in medical bills or have to look for a new job now. The logic of neoliberal individualism says anyone can do this if they need it. It says, hey, you're depressed? Get on some antidepressants. Oh, you slipped up and now are going through severe withdrawals? Check into rehab so you can get better, get back on that horse, and get back to work. But so many people aren't able to do any of those things. 44 million Americans do not have health insurance. And it's not because they're too lazy to get it. Maybe some of them, but not 44 million. The Republican response to this is to just keep denying and keep claiming every problem you have is of your own doing. The competition is fair. You just aren't working hard enough if you're not doing well in this competition. And the Democrats' response is to just simply move the starting line around and the competition up so that everyone who is particularly marginalized by capitalism could just have a better starting point through things like affirmative action, anti-discrimination laws, free healthcare, etc. And so often we're told these are your only two options. And so many of our policies are really just about where do you want everyone to be placed within the competition. Leftists want to just end this whole competition altogether. Now, if any Jordan Peterson fanboys are watching this, I commend you for making it all this way. But let's keep going and let's complete this hero's journey. Let's fulfill the goal of individuation. In describing the return home, Joseph Campbell says, having died to his personal ego, he arose again, established in the self. So you cross the return threshold, having changed, now a master of two worlds. Before you were a master of no worlds, not even the world you grew up in, because now you have discovered yourself and have discovered that life is hard. You are not that important. Your life is not about you. You are not in control, and you are going to die. And you return free to live because you can now serve the community, because you now know your role in the larger collective. That's the real strength. Break free from individualism. You are meant for greater things than to be pushed around by capitalist propagandists telling you to just work on nothing but yourself and never question the societal and economic causes for our problems today. The goal of individuation is to go through the process of understanding your personal struggles so that you can finally start to pay attention to the struggles of others and perhaps seek to change the system that creates so much unnecessary struggle. Thank you everyone for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Subscribe for more videos like this. Also, you can follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/whoisdamon, where you stream every Tuesday and Thursday and talk about the stuff we talk about on YouTube, but more freeform and interactive. Also, I'll greatly appreciate any support through Patreon, patreon.com/Damon Garcia. You can support me if you enjoy my stuff, and you can see some exclusive content. And shout out to all my patrons who support me to make this video. Karen in Colorado, Ranger Jenny, Refined Your Scene, James Finlay, New Transcendentalist, Kristen Mouse, Mike Talkman, Peter John Blake, Rob Hutton, Jack, Theory Plebe, Jacob McCarthy, Mike Lodato, Frank Morales, Vema Pasa, They Were Monsters, and Julian King. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.